Hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Fuck Did I Just Watch? With your host, as always, Kyle McLemore. This week we'll be recapping and reviewing the latest fantasy adventure film that is Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves. Now, before we get too far along in the review, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, as it is much appreciated and it helps the show stay alive. And if you haven't seen D&D H Among T and would still like to, make sure you pause now and return later, as there may be several spoilers up ahead. That's right, this is your official spoiler alert. Dungeons & Dragons is both written and directed by the dynamic duo that is John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein. This isn't the first time that they've teamed up to both write and direct a film. They've also worked together on several others, including one you might remember, Horrible Bosses. Chris Pine is sort of like our main leader of the gang. He's like a former Harper, I believe that they're called. He's kind of like a guy who's sworn to like always do good and never ask anything in return, until his wife is brutally murdered and he kind of turns to a life of thievery. And Chris Pine, of course, does an unbelievable job as our leader of the gang. He is effortlessly charming, and he is unbelievably charismatic. He has a lot of really great humor in the film, not overwhelmingly so with the jokes, like just peppering it up enough to be like really silly, lighthearted, and fun, and still like really charming and like really great as a leader. Michelle Rodriguez, kind of like our unofficial number 2 of the film, kind of like our second in charge of the gang, and honestly really blowing me away in this movie. Like, she nailed it super hard in this role, and it took me a while to figure out, why is Michelle Rodriguez doing so amazing in this movie? Not only with her really, really great action sequences, but she is nailing all of like the humor in the movie. And it took me a while to be like, why is she doing so great in this movie? And it's like, oh, because she's kind of just playing herself. Michelle Rodriguez, who I've always like interpreted as like, you know, she's always like kind of like the same ish character, just like the tough girl who's like kind of tomboyish and like kicking everyone's ass. Also, like most known as like Vin Diesel's girlfriend in the Fast and Furious movies. And when you think about it, her character is kind of just like a female version of Vin Diesel, like, and that's kind of the vibe in this film. Honestly, she's kind of like the Drax of Dungeons and Dragons, like really tough, but also not like the most intelligent. Like, a lot of her jokes are just like from not interpreting things correctly, or just being like unironic, or just being like really blunt. But it works so well with her like really like Vin Diesel-y kind of like delivery of her lines. Whatever, it just matches so perfectly with how she just acts naturally, that it is just such a perfect fit. It was really great watching Michelle Rodriguez in this film. Justice Smith popping up as well, who you might recognize from Detective Pikachu. In this film, he's like our mage, kind of like the sorcerer of the gang. He's like our wizard, not the best wizard. It's kind of fun watching him be like a so-so kind of magician. He's like really self-loathing through the film. It's like pretty funny. He's like very relatable. Also keeps the momentum of the film going. Like, he's great in it. And the dude is rocking a amazing British accent, who, like, if I hadn't known who he is, like, I would have totally guessed that he is like authentically British. But the dude, 100% not British at all, and rocking one of the best accents of the film. Sophia Lillis as one of the final members of the gang, and she's like our shape-shifting, turning into animals kind of member. Sophia Lillis, you might recognize as the young Beverly Marsh in the latest It movies. Her character is very interesting, that she can shape-shift into whatever, whether it be like a fly, a worm, an eagle, a mouse, an owl bear. So it's like, it's interesting that she can like turn into just like a regular animal, but then also do like hybrid animals, and she only does that owl bear. Like, there's no other hybrids. There's no snake wolf or anything. It's just the owl bear, which in itself is cool. She doesn't get as much human screen time, and I feel like if anybody's character doesn't really develop much, it's probably hers. She's kind of like just backgrounding it a lot through the film. She's just kind of in the background, like, hey, you guys need a tiger or anything? Like, you need a worm, I'm here. And of course, that brings us to Hugh Grant, where he is just unbelievably like a sleazy con man scumbag, and at the same time totally irresistibly charming and hilarious, dude. It is such a great dynamic and balance to be so unlikable and like really like a total sleazebag, but at the same time, like, I just cannot get enough. And like, he is so hilariously charming, dude. He is nailing it, and like, I'm telling you, this is like the start of a huge Hugh Grant comeback. Rae Jean Page pops up in this film and just like adds a pretty thick layer of confusion. His character is introduced as like being like slightly immortal. He's been around for like hundreds of years. He's got like this daywalker thing where it's like he was like partially infected but not fully infected, so he's like got all their powers but none of their weaknesses. And then he's also got like this weird like, I don't know, supermodel thing that he's always doing. Like everywhere he goes, he's always just like walking around just like, sup. Like, when he's first introduced, and it was like 100 years ago during the battle, and like, I had to give the helmet to somebody, and then this fucking guy walked up and was like, sup, I'll take the helmet. And then later, there's like this crazy fish that everyone's like, holy shit, look at this thing. And he's just like, what's up, fish? And the fish is like, damn, this dude's cool. Like, that's like his like main power, is just walking up like, what's up? Like being like super handsome and just like, I'm immortal. What's going on? And so if you can't tell from now, like all the acting in this movie is really great. All the actors do a amazing job. Almost everybody was like made for their character. Everybody does really, really great. And you know what is probably the strongest part of this movie is all the character introductions. Every time a new character is introduced, they get their own little spotlight, and it is really, really entertaining. Justice Smith's introduction is one of the best parts of the film. There's like a whole anti-gravity, the whole thing switches, people are flying to the ceiling, the cameras are like flipping with the audience. It is really like, not only is it entertaining, but it's also like cinematically like really great on the eyes. Same thing with like our Sophia Lewis animal changer. Her introduction with like the whole owlbear thing is like really, really cool. And the same thing with Michelle Rodriguez. She has a unbelievable fight scene at the beginning where they crank the bass on every single hit, so it's just like boom, like you feel it in your chest every time she slams somebody, and it is great. But unfortunately, what doesn't work with the film is that it has this like feeling of like, it makes you feel like you're playing Dungeons and Dragons on expert level, and nobody is there to explain anything. Sophia Lillis has like her introduction of like her whole group of like people that she lives with, but they're not really introduced or shown like hardly at all. There's also like just like this total off like line of just like, yeah, so then fucking Emperor Underwood went into a coma and I took over, and it's like, what? Wait, so there was like an emperor of the world and he just went into like a magic coma? Like, what? Rae Jean Page's whole thing of like, I'm a Than, but I'm a good Than, but there's only bad Thans, but I'm like a daywalker Than, like, I'm cool. Like, it's just like, huh? Like, what? You're going too fast, man. Like, I don't know any of these terms or whatever you're throwing at me, and it's like, you need to slow down or at least try to explain it a tiny bit more, because you're losing me. The villain aspect of the film is also a little strange too. It's a little of the weaker part of the film. It's like the main villain is like this female sorceress who's like the henchwoman of like a even more powerful sorcerer, who kind of like pops up in the shadows at the beginning of the film and is like talking to her like, yes, you're doing great. Mwahaha. Eventually, mwahaha, our plan will be complete. Never see that dude again. Like, he's like the main bad guy that she's doing it all for, and he's just like not in the movie ever. But overall, it is like a pretty fun, pretty light, pretty like adventurous kind of like fantasy film. It is like overall pretty good. It has like a real vibe of like Guardians of the Galaxy. It has a real Marvel kind of feeling throughout this film. It has like, the same kind of steps, or like the same kind of like feeling. Like it's got like your really super charming, silly Chris, right? Not Chris Pratt, Chris Pine. It's got your super tough but kind of dumb number 2. That's not Dave Bautista, that's Michelle Rodriguez. It just has like a really overwhelming feeling of like there is just so much Dungeons and Dragons stuff that they're just trying to throw at you all at the same time, and it's like, hey man, I liked a lot of this, but you are just jamming way too much, way too fast. I love all like the aesthetic. I love walking around and seeing all these interesting, that guy looks like a snake, and then there's like a cat person and like a cool dragon homeless guy, and like it feels very rich. It feels like a really good start to something. It feels like the beginning of what could potentially be very, very good. And so what do we give Dungeons and Dragons? It's one of those films where it's like, it's really in the middle. It feels like a C is kind of too low, but then it also feels like a B is kind of too high for this one. It's like that weird kind of in-between thing, which is why we're going to hit it with a B-. If you felt differently about Dungeons and Dragons, make sure you comment down below, and if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button, as it's much appreciated. I am your host, as always, Kyle McLemore, and we'll see you next time at the movies.